What's up, everyone? So I know the vast majority that are actually here know better, but this PSA is not for those of you who actually know. Instead, it's for the ones who actually don't. So picture this. You're having a conversation with ChatGPT about maybe your medical symptoms. Maybe you're discussing your divorce strategy, or maybe you're talking about a draft. Here's one thing that you actually need to know as of May 13th, 2025. Every single word that you actually type is now permanently stored on OpenAI servers by a federal court order. And we're not just talking about this being some kind of temporary measure or half measure or anything like that, or it's not like there's anonymized data or something that they're storing. It's like all the data, even if you delete it, is still there. Now, obviously, I know many of you already see AIs like this as a severe threat vector, and therefore tell them nothing, and good for you. Even if you do practice good security, does your family, right? Do your friends? This is the actual value proposition for those of you who are actually on point OpSec-wise. A federal judge just turned the world's most popular AI assistant into a mandatory surveillance system. And this is thanks to the New York Times, a newspaper that's been hemorrhaging subscribers faster than a severed artery. And as a result, they feel that the world needs to conform to them and have, as a result, decided to throw a legal tantrum about their articles being used to train an AI. Judge Ona Wang ordered that OpenAI must preserve all output log data, so those conversations and the chats that you think you deleted, they aren't deleted. Every kind of like embarrassing question you thought disappeared when you actually hit the delete button is still very much there and will stay there. The company that built its reputation on we don't store your data, to some extent, is now legally required to become the NSA's wet dream. Basically, OpenAI processed millions of conversations on a daily basis, as far as we know. And we're talking about terabytes of data that include things like medical queries from desperate patients, legal strategies from people who can't actually afford lawyers, business secrets from entrepreneurs, personal confessions from people seeking help, political dissident information from people living under authoritarian regimes. Some people use it as a talk therapist as well. All of this data now sits in servers that will be breached at some point. The ivory tower judge that sits in Manhattan doesn't understand, doesn't care, and probably doesn't have any clue as to what this order actually entails. She fails to actually grasp that at some point, almost every database becomes a target. Every retained byte is a liability. The OPM hack exposed 22 million federal employees. Equifax leaked like 140 million Americans' financial data, and those were organizations that were actually trying to secure their systems. Now, the Times couldn't innovate their way out of a wet paper bag, so basically they're using courts to shake down the companies that do innovate. And if it wasn't bad enough that anytime you visit their site, they try to act like it's 1930, and that they're still the gatekeepers of knowledge via a paywall that can be simply killed by disabling JavaScript, by the way. But and I'm referencing the New York Times here, not ChatGPT. Their business model collapsed because people realized that paying $20 a month for propaganda just wasn't worth it. And as a result, their solution was to sue the future. And they're claiming OpenAI stole their articles, and the same articles that they blasted across the internet for free if you disable JavaScript. It's the same content that they stuff with tracking cookies and sell data to data brokers, but when an AI reads it to learn things like language patterns, all of a sudden it's theft. Dying institutions using federal force to extract rent from innovation is exactly what's happening here. They can call it copyright protection if they want. However, it's obviously more like new age regulatory capture. Now, think about this for a minute. That court that I talked about doesn't specify who gets access to this data. It just says preserve it for potential use in litigation. I've dealt with this kind of vague language before, and I'll tell you what this actually means in practice. Discovery requests, subpoenas, things like national security letters. Every 3-letter agency basically just got a golden ticket to the most intimate conversations of millions of people who, a lot of them, thought that their conversations were going to be private. Again, we can say, well, they're stupid for trusting a company. That's bad OpSec. I'm not going to disagree on any of those points. But again, there are a ton of people who are affected who don't even know what OpSec is. And that's kind of the point of this, is to bring this to light and hopefully educate those people on what OpSec actually is. The FBI doesn't need to hack OpenAI anymore if they wanted to get something, nor do intelligence agencies. They just need to file a request with the Southern District of New York, and they'll get everything that they wanted. So think about every activist who used ChatGPT, for example, to organize, or every journalist who checked sources. By default now, the data is cataloged, searchable, and ready for legal exploitation. So hopefully you're not deemed an enemy of the state anytime soon. So from an OpSec perspective, OpenAI just became absolutely radioactive. And that's because every query creates a permanent piece of evidence that's stored for forever. Deletion is absolutely meaningless because the data persists even after deletion. Your conversations are one subpoena away from becoming public record. OpenAI employees now have access to data that they were never actually supposed to see originally. The attack surface just expanded exponentially. And in response, OpenAI, to their credit, has said that they're concerned about privacy implications. They know this is an absolute disaster. And to their credit, they're also filing an appeal, which is not cheap. So that's awesome that they're actually doing that. That could take years, though. Federal appeals are not known for being things that get resolved very quickly. But a federal judge said jump, so they're inclined to basically ask how high because they have to. Now, this is exactly why things like decentralized systems, local AI models, and owning your compute actually matters. Every centralized system becomes a control point for the overall system. Every convenient service becomes a surveillance node at some point. The solution isn't to beg OpenAI to protect your privacy or to trust VPNs, as I've seen a lot of people advocate for, which is nuts to me, but that's a whole different story. The solution isn't to trust the courts to be reasonable, because they won't be. The solution is to build systems that can't be subpoenaed or are extremely difficult to be subpoenaed, that run local models and use encrypted channels that practice proper OpSec or operational security, making their core orders irrelevant through technology is, in my opinion, the best way to move forward with stuff like this. This order isn't going to just magically disappear. The Times smells money and the Fed smell data. And OpenAI is just kind of caught in between. And all its customers are under them. So either way, it's a really bad position to be in. It's a matter of when, not if, this database actually gets leaked at some point. It'll make previous breaches look like practice runs. Like I said, there's going to be all kinds of data that's actually in these when it does happen, from business intelligence to legal strategies and all that kind of stuff we talked about before. And all tied to email addresses, IP addresses, and usage patterns, never mind the passwords and API keys, everything else that would be there. It would just be an absolute gold mine to get your hands on. And the identity theft potential just alone is absolutely catastrophic. Now, I know a ton of my subscribers are smart enough to have avoided putting their personal info into models like this because many of you are extremely sharp when it comes to OpSec, PersSec, and InfoSec. However, you guys are all the minority, and I know that. Millions of people opened up to AI because they thought it was safe. They asked questions they never asked another human being. They explored ideas that they'd never speak out loud. And that trust is now weaponized against them, all thanks to a dying newspaper and an out-of-touch federal judge. So don't use ChatGPT for anything that you wouldn't want read out loud in a federal court, because That's exactly where this might end up. The New York Times just proved that obsolete institutions will use state violence to try and protect their failed business models, and OpenAI just proved that no corporate promise of privacy actually survives contact with federal judges. And this is why you need to depend on yourself and yourself only. If you're thinking right now that you've already disclosed a ton, so who cares? My advice would be, don't make it worse. Get rid of your OpenAI account and invest in a decent GPU. And run a local model if you really need to use AI. Learn about how to set up custom knowledge bases and implement RAG systems and all that kind of stuff. But get out of the surveillance state ecosystem now while your exposure might be less. Like if you spend years inside these ecosystems, you just get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and the dependency will get greater and greater and greater and greater. That's what they want. I hope you choose not to do that and choose to invest in yourself. Controlling your data is always better than allowing someone else to control your data. So in any case, I really hope to see what you guys think about this. What are your ideas on it? Do you think you'll be able to convince family members who have adopted the use of AI models like this to cut back or cut out or shift over to a different modality that allows them to perhaps still utilize AI, but in a different way or in a safe way? What are some of the methodologies that you use to stay safe with things like local models and stuff like that? I'd love to hear about all that kind of stuff in the comments if you guys are up for it. In any case, thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video.